Russian President Vladimir Putin is inviting Westerners with shared values to live in Russia, portraying it as a safe haven for those looking to escape their neoliberal home countries. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, hundreds of Westerners have been looking into President Putin's new visa scheme to leave the woke West behind and relocate to Russia. But why are they choosing Russia when many of its own citizens have opted to leave?
When the war in Ukraine first broke out in February 2022, over 650,000 Russians fled their country.
We have left deliberately, I may say due to ideological reasons, for several days after the 24th of February 2022. We were trying to understand what was going on, and in March 2022 we decided we should leave.
But now, in a surprising twist, Westerners are heading to Russia.
Where am I? I'm an American, not in America. Do you know this place? Does it look familiar?
Joseph is an American, enjoying his life in Russia. With many escaping from their own country, a common question comes to mind.
What is an American and a Canadian doing in Red Square in Moscow, Russia?
President Putin recently signed a decree allowing foreign citizens to apply for temporary residency if they share traditional Russian values. It is being pitched as a place to go for Westerners who are rejecting the liberal agenda of their own countries. To temporarily stay in the country, they don't have to speak Russian or know the country's history. A list of countries considered to promote a destructive neoliberal agenda have been published. It includes the US, UK, Germany, Canada, and Australia. How many Westerners will take up Putin's offer? And what else is motivating this move from the Kremlin?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining me from Moscow is Joseph Stephen Rose. He's an American who is living in Russia. Also in Moscow, we have Ilja Belobragin. He's the general managing partner and co-founder of Move to Russia, which provides concierge migration services for people wanting to make the move. And here with me in the studio, I'm delighted to say, we have Paul Ingram. He is academic program manager at the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. That's at the University of Cambridge. Gentlemen, you're all very welcome to Roundtable. Joseph, I'll come to you first. Just tell us what your life is like now compared to what it was in the US.
Well, my life is as if I'm living in America. And I say that for Westerners to hear because I want them to know that this is a very, very normal place with people and families and jobs and cars and buildings and everything you would expect from a normal Western country. In fact, I think it's even a little bit better because I think they've been trying for the past 30 years to be like the West, and now they've surpassed it in many ways.
So no regrets?
No, no regrets. I was a little concerned when I first moved here because that was 8 days before the special military operation. So as I arrived, all the Americans were leaving, all the Westerners were leaving, and I was told I should do the same. And if I did stay, I needed to make sure I bought olive oil and Parmesan cheese before it was all gone, as sanctions were coming and my embassy was telling me to leave. But I was here with my Russian wife and my 5 children, and we had just committed to living in this new place for a while, and I decided to roll the dice and stay.
Ilja, just talk us through your business. How busy are you with Westerners wanting to move to Russia?
Well, our business is really focusing on providing the opportunity for high net individuals to move themselves, their families, and their assets to Russia. And we have been busier and busier by the day. I think the general fear of our clients is that they see the potential Iron Curtain is coming down, and they feel that they are on the wrong side of it because all the growth is going to be in Eurasia, potentially not in the West. And this is just one of the fears that our clients have, and they like to diversify and they like to move. Plus, many don't agree with the woke agenda that some of the countries in the West promote quite heavily.
And Ilja, that's something that comes up then. People mention what you're calling the woke agenda. People feel that the West is too liberal and they want conservative values, which they seem to think they'll get in Russia.
That's correct. And I mean, just to be fair, Russia has no problem whatsoever with people that have non-traditional sexual orientation. President Vladimir Putin said so himself on many occasions. We're just very much against any kind of that ideology promoting to the children. And that's something that our clients really share. Whatever you are, an IT professional from California, or you live in London, you don't want your kids to be educated without your knowledge on this sort of propaganda. And I think that's fair.
Let's bring in Paul. Paul, what are traditional Russian values then? Vladimir Putin is making this appeal to people in the West who share what he's calling traditional Russian values. What are they?
Well, my understanding, and I'm willing to be corrected, but I would say that they are about focus on the family and focus on the local community, the Orthodox Church, and the values that come from that. They're not a million miles from traditional values in the West, so nor indeed in Turkey or anywhere else. There's a lot of a desire to halt the slide, as many people feel, towards a different, more progressive, very liberal individualist agenda. And I think in that respect, it probably is quite attractive to quite a lot of people.
It's a pretty seismic move to make, isn't it? I mean, the language barrier for a start, everything else, the logistics, everything that has happened since the war in Ukraine. I mean, it's a massive move to make.
It's a big move, and I think also it's very difficult to reverse it. I mean, I've not done it. I wouldn't imagine doing it myself. But I've been to Russia, and just going to Russia as a visitor puts me in a situation where I'm often seen as a pariah, and I've had to actually put my job at risk just by visiting. So it's not just the going to live; it's also even just the connecting with Russia. So when Ilya was saying that that there is this sort of iron curtain going up, I think we see that. Those of us that travel around the world see it much more.
Joseph, what was the reaction from your family and friends back in the United States then when you said, we're moving to Russia?
Well, they were afraid for me, and they told me I should come back, and I did not. And after a few months of realizing, yeah, I'm glad I stayed, everything is normal here, I started my channel to tell the West in English how normal Russia actually is. And then to my surprise, people started saying they want to actually move here. But I agree with you, gentlemen. It is difficult. It would be very difficult to move. And I think you would only do that if you felt like you had to, not because Russia's not a good place, but because there is the language barrier, there is a cost involved. But if you feel like you're trying to raise children and they are in danger because of the woke agenda, because of a now anti-religious culture, you know, you're going to feel like, no, I have to do this, even though it's going to be hard, even though I have to learn new language, even though it's going to cost me a lot of money.
And Joseph, you have 5 children. How are they getting on with life in Russia?
Well, 3 of them are adults, 2 of them are in university, 1 is teaching English. The little ones, of course, they're little, so they have to do whatever I say. But they've all gotten in just fine. They love it here.
And tell me, how have you mastered the language or not? I know your wife is Russian, but how have you... It's a totally different alphabet to begin with.
Well, it's very difficult. It's hard, especially for me. I'm 50 years old, and my show is in English, and that's a full-time job. Plus, people see me on the street. They know I'm an American. They want to practice English with me. The signs are still largely in English. So if you're a Westerner and you don't know Russian, and let's say you practiced for about 3 months before you came over here, you'd probably do just fine living in Moscow for a while as you learn the language.
Ilya, tell me, the people who come to you, you mentioned high net worth individuals. Are they likely to stay in Russia very long term, or is this something they're doing on a short term basis while There's a war in Ukraine, there's economic difficulties perhaps in their own countries. Are these people who've made the decision that this is it, we're staying in Russia for decades?
I think that there is a general emphasis that a lot of actual, I would say, entrepreneur business people, people that actually been driving the development of the West for the last several decades, they don't feel that the West is actually going in the right direction, even economically, right? And it's about diversification. It's about having a foot in each of the cap. You want to be in the West and you want to be in the East. And they see that as a potential kind of plan B, hedging their bets, making sure that if needed be, they can move, right, on a rapid way. Some people are, afraid of a large issues after the elections in US, right? We have a whole list of people that are waiting to move to Russia if, for example, Mr. Trump loses, again, due to traditional values, right? So all those things and unprecedented, I would say, instability in the world makes people afraid, of course, and uneasy, and they want to have an insurance policy. Russia is that insurance policy in that sense for many of the high net worth individuals.
Ilya, what do Russians think of these Westerners moving to their country then? Is it a mixture of novelty, curiosity? How do Russians view these Westerners moving in?
I think you can also ask, of course, Joseph, but in general, Russians are very good at distinguishing between the government and the people. They are very curious about the people from Britain, US, French, German, right? But they might very much dislike what the British government, for example, does and says, right?
I want to go back to Joseph and just touch upon that, Joseph. How do Russians view you then? You know, they see this American guy, you know, you stand out in the street, how you look, how you sound. I'm guessing the clothes you wear are a bit different as well. You know, what do Russians make of you?
They love me. I'm also a tall guy, so I'm easy to spot. And your other guest, Ilya, is absolutely correct. They distinguish between DC and London versus regular Western people. And, you know, Russians, they grew up watching Hollywood movies, so they think Westerners are cool. They know that it's the government that they should have a problem with, not the individual man on the street.
Paul, that's a good point, isn't it? I mean, I've travelled extensively in Russia. They're very curious people. They want to know where you're from. They want to know what you do and what life is like where you're from. I guess it's just the nature of human curiosity worldwide.
Yeah, worldwide, I would say. I don't think this is unique to Russia, frankly. I mean, I used to travel frequently to Iran when we had no diplomatic relations at all, and the Iranians were extremely warm and friendly. So I don't think this is unique to Russia, and I think it is one of the great hopes there is that whilst our governments are in great conflict with one another, the people can still communicate and still relate to one another. And actually, I think that's even more powerful than what we were talking about at the beginning around the ideological difference between peoples. I think people can overcome those too, because actually, in the end, we are human beings. And the way in which governments seem to play their games and put people up against one another and put iron curtains down is reprehensible, and why this particular initiative is quite positive in its effect. The intention may be quite different. I mean, I think there is some degree of the Kremlin looking at the current situation and seeing that the most vulnerable dimension of the Western culture is its culture and the way in which the political winds are moving. So it's not about the West's military weakness. There is no military weakness, but there is actually a growing disaffection with the way Western societies are organised. And I think if I was sitting in the Kremlin, I would be looking for ways like this to signal, because it is in the end only a signal in the grand scheme of things. We're talking hundreds or thousands of people, not hundreds of thousands or millions, but it is a signal that the West is not as united as it could be. And to use words like neoliberalism, which is right there in the decree, is, I think, very clever, because I don't think there's a great deal of support today for the neoliberal agenda if we interpret that as extreme free market capitalism that also is a very individualist, me-first agenda. And I think if you're looking at this either from traditional Russian values or indeed from the other extreme, from a more leftist agenda, the neoliberal agenda has been hollowed out.
Joseph, back to you. Do you worry about being used as a propaganda tool, maybe, by the Russian government, by Vladimir Putin? What do you say to that argument?
No, I feel like, the government is trustworthy. I think they are for people who are for traditional family values. I'm living amongst people that come from the same cultural tree as my country. That would be, Jerusalem and Athens, and people that, appreciate Jesus, you could say, whether they go to church or not. People that like French food, that appreciate German fairy tales. I think these are almost the same cultures. And governmental wise, I feel absolutely free here. I don't feel like I would be used at all.
Ilja, I think one issue that would perhaps put a lot of people off in the West from moving to Russia would be that of conscription. If they have fighting age young men in the family from 16, 17 years of age up, is that something that they should be very concerned about, given the state of the war in Ukraine still?
To answer the question bluntly, you can only be conscripted if you are a citizen. And it will take you at least almost 8 years before you can become one. First, you have to get a temporary residence permit and then wait. And then you have to have a permanent residence permit, and then it's 5 years before you get a citizenship. So, well, they should be concerned maybe within 8 years. But I think it's fair that if there is a conscription in the country and you want to become a citizen, of course, it's also voluntary. You can stay a permanent resident without having a citizenship. So I would say no.
So tell me then, how do Russian families feel if their sons are being conscripted and going to war, and foreigners are coming in, living a Russian life and having everything Russia has to offer, but their sons get an 8-year pass?
I think in general, the migration to Russia from the West so far has been, well, it's small, right? I mean, that's Joseph told you that everybody was leaving while he was going, right? Now the whole thing is actually starting to reverse. We have this new shared values visa that essentially grants opportunity to try out Russia for 3 years without actually doing the language test and without any quota. 1 billion people in 47 countries right now are eligible for that. And we'll see. Well, you can tell that this is a signal. I think that what is actually happening is Russia wants to attract quality workforce for the economy that is booming. And there's a lot of things to do, especially in the Far East. So I think Russia in general would be happy for people to come in and help with all the work that needs to be done, because the trade infrastructure to the Far East is not going to build itself. We also have a lot of trade going on with Iran and India, and all those things needs to be built and worked and developed. We need great people with traditional values.
So, Ilja, how many inquiries a week would you say you're getting from people wanting to make the move?
Well, I think so far we have at least 300, not per week, but in the last month since it has been launched, and that's only us. And it's coming in from all over the place. We even have inquiries from New Zealand and Japan.
New Zealand and Japan. I'll just put that to Paul. I mean, Paul, can you see other countries maybe in that region tapping into this shared values visa and putting something similar together if it attracts in high net worth individuals?
Well, high net worth individuals can go anywhere almost if they've got the money. I think they're always welcome in every country. But I think Russia is pretty unique here for the reasons we've just heard. It's a very high resource rich country, and it needs workers. And so I don't see China doing this. I think China has plenty of people, and I don't see Japan doing this, and I don't see many countries in Asia doing it at all. I mean, Asia is extremely high population. I don't see any European countries doing it because, I mean, they already think they've got a problem with too many immigrants. So I think there is something quite unique here about Russia, and I think that's got more to do with the economy, but I think also there's a political reason that I was talking about earlier. I mean, it is a fact that the research shows that states are far more vulnerable to internal changes than they are to external threat. And so if you are a country like Russia looking at a very powerful NATO, which is more together than it has been for a long time, for all the reasons we know about, then you're going to be looking at other means to try and weaken that alliance than military responses, because Russia against NATO is very unbalanced. But the Europeans and the Americans do have a significant and growing problem of internal cohesion. And that's actually a much bigger threat to any regimes or governments than any external threat.
Joseph, tell me, what do you miss about the United States then, if anything?
Pretty much nothing. That's one of the points I make on my show, is that it's so the same here. I don't miss anything. And to the point you guys were making earlier, I do want to say that, Russians don't want people coming here that just want to, make money off the country and not serve necessarily. I have spoken to Russians, young Russians who have served, that do not look like football player types, that it wouldn't be their thing to do. And because it wasn't really on their heart, but they needed to do it anyway, they served their year, which was something like mowing the lawn and taking out the trash, and then they were done. And they don't look like they were scarred for life or anything like that. So I think if you do want to come here, if you're listening to this program and wondering about moving, you should have your heart in it, that this is going to be your new home, that your grandchildren are going to be fully Russian, if that makes sense.
You'd never go back to the United States, your old way of life?
I wouldn't say that, but I think that these things operate on a 30 to 70 year cycle where a country will be doing bad while another country is doing well. I wouldn't want to live in Russia in the 90s. I do want to live in Russia now. Maybe 30, 50, 70 years from now, it'd be better to live in Britain or the US, but I won't be alive for that. So I need to be here now. This is the best place, the best time now.
And your children are happy to settle as well and stay?
Yeah, they are. Well, my oldest actually flew back to Vegas today to spend a few months with his mom, because he hasn't seen her for years, because we are a blended family. So he's flirting with which country to live in. But he's perfectly happy here. He's been living here longer than me. He's been here for 5 years. He's only been here as an adult teaching English to Russians.
Ilya, Joseph's family sound like they've got it perfectly set up in Russia. I'm sure you'd be hoping for many more clients like Joseph's wife and children in the future.
Oh, we do. And there is a growing market going forward. And unfortunately, as you have already discussed in the show, much of the problems in the West are really internal, right? And if you, for example, look at the UK economy, they recently published a report, I think it was the Bureau of Oversight, Budgetary Oversight, that is essentially a 50 years of managed economic decline for the country. Now, everybody with a bit of financial economic education that actually do read the reports and not read just the general news, they don't want to stay in the country that are going to have 50 years of economic decline. They're going to look for other places to move. And the economy, of course, is very important, also in Germany. But of course, let's see how USA will be doing going forward. And one of the alternatives that people are looking to move their families, such as Joseph already did, is Russia. And it's going to be on the uptrend for the next 30, 40, 50 years. After that, we'll see. But probably none of us will be alive for that point. But we all want the best for our children.
Final question, just back to you, Joseph, on that point. I guess, you know, every parent does want the very best for their children. You genuinely feel that life in Russia is better for your kids than life in the United States?
Yes, I genuinely feel that it's better, way better. I think that everything is in its place because of traditional family values. I think there's more mental security for my children. They know what to expect. Everything makes sense. And as far as, you know, abandoning my country, like I said, my heart is still in America. But I think if you are, let's say, a religious person, it's going to be much easier for you to make a move like this, because I consider myself a serious Christian. So I just went from one Christian place to another. If you're a secular person and your main identification is your citizenship, then I understand it might be hard. But for us, we're very glad we made this move.
Joseph, Ilja and Paul here in the studio, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see there, please do hit subscribe. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.